Hey, good afternoon and welcome to today's live chat on the Long Beach Post. I'm reporter Jason Ruiz. I cover City Hall and various other things. Today we're talking about the People's Budget, which was released earlier this week. I believe it was on Tuesday. And joining me today is we have James Suazo. He's an associate director with Long Beach Forward. We have Don Modkins and Audrena Redmond, who are both with Black Lives Matter. And yeah, well, I mean, let's get into it. I don't know who wants to take this first question, but for those who didn't read the story or aren't familiar with the work around the People's Budget over the past few years, uh, who could give me the quickest summary of what the People's Budget is?
I can start us off. Yeah, and so thanks again for inviting us to chat. I'm super excited to be here with Don and Audrena and Black Lives Matter, who's really helping lead this effort with all of these allies, and in this moment too, to really lead and center Black lives and talk about what it really means to defund Long Beach Police and reinvest in Black lives and communities of color. So, in a nutshell, the People's Budget is this effort to really, one, call for divestment away from the police department, specifically the majority share and lion's share of the general fund budget that they have, and reinvest it into services, programs, and opportunities that really prioritize Black lives and communities of color as a recognition and step and path to ending anti-Blackness and structural racism within the city. We've been able to show through the People's Budget campaign in the past that communities coming together, whether we're Black, Cambodian, Filipino, Latinx, white, have been able to build alliances and actually reverse these historic trends that we've seen over time of racist policy making, racist decision making. And we're here to be able to offer a vision of what that reinvestment actually looks like and how we can start reimagining safety in our communities.
Right. And Don, we spoke last week on the phone. And thank you for joining us today. And actually, I did this last time, but I forgot. Anybody who's watching, if you want to send questions in, you have questions for our guests today, feel free to send them in either through Facebook or through, I think you do that through YouTube as well, the chat function. But Don, we spoke last week, and I think generally speaking, I think a lot of people think that all the Black Lives Matter movement wants is defunding the police. Well, I think it's been shown that a lot of people don't really understand what that means, or it does mean different things to different people. But what other things is Black Lives Matter asking for, and how that what has been included in the People's Budget in terms of those asks or demands?
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. I think since the inception of Black Lives Matter global movement, it was born out of resistance to state violence on Black bodies. And so while, I think that start around Zimmerman getting off after killing Trayvon Martin and the way that Bob McCullough and Ferguson manipulated that entire grand jury process, for me, those, I think for a lot of us, those are events that happened that moved us into trying to disrupt that sanctioned violence, that sanctioned state violence against Black bodies. And so for us here in Long Beach, it was the year that Dante Jordan was murdered by LBPD that moved us into action. And ever since then, just seeing the level of corruption that exists in the city between our local systems and institutions and policing, we've been calling it out ever since then, since 2013, end of 2013, early 2014.
Right.
Whether it was around destruction of records, whether it was around the killings, the direct violence, whether it's around the corruption between the mayor and the bullying that goes on with city council for the police, whether it's around evading or avoiding transparency laws that were passed via Senate Bill 1421. So, we've been calling out these injustices, and we know that they're grounded in white supremacy, institutionalized white supremacy and anti-Blackness that are at the foundations of all of our current systems in this country. And Long Beach is just a microcosm of a resistance of that and a call to transform these systems that are happening around the world.
Right, and let's get Audrena into this conversation. I don't know if you're the best person to speak to this, but Don just talked about the calling out of these issues. But how do you guys want to go about getting them fixed through the people's budget?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There is a long way to go, right? As Don started saying, we start with chattel slavery in this country. We move forward to penal colonies, then Jim Crow, and then redlining, and just a whole variety of ways in which Black people have been oppressed and suppressed and denied. And that has manifested itself in things like our health services, for example. We would like to see a return to some sort of community health centers where Black folk reside, so that health issues that have been made very clear with COVID-19 can be handled in communities where people are. We would like to see some form of reparations for communities like that here in Long Beach, which were greatly impacted by the war on drugs, which we all know was fabricated Republican Party Southern strategy coming to life in our communities, right? So we need reparations for those communities. We would like to see some unification of Black families that have been haunted and terrorized by the foster care system. You go to any homeless community and you'll see a variety of people who've been emancipated out onto the streets because their families have been destroyed by a social service program, which is really meant to deny them what we say is the fabric of America, which is our families. We would like to see community-led restorative projects. Our communities need healing. There's lots happening in communities and folk, I used to be one of these people until I got some education. I used to ask all the time, why is this happening to us? Why is this happening? What does this mean about us? Are we somehow deficient? And the answer to that is no, we are not deficient. The answer is we are subject to a white supremacist culture that's so very, very deep that to call it out incites the races who maintain it.
Right. And you brought up very good points. I don't think a lot of people in Long Beach are maybe aware of this city's history of redlining housing covenants, where you literally couldn't sell a house to a person of color if you lived in a specific community. But in terms of getting the money restructured to make these issues, we have a question from an audience viewer. How involved have your groups, whether it be Black Lives Matter or Long Beach Forward, how involved are you guys in the city budget discussion with the people who make the city budget? And do you feel like your voices are being heard?
I think one of the things that we've taken away from the past work that we've done in collaboration and in solidarity with each other, and not just between BLM and Long Beach Forward, but other groups like the Immigrant Rights Coalition, Housing Long Beach Residents Empowered. Oftentimes we force these conversations, right? And I think there's a recognition oftentimes in Long Beach, we are very solidly like a democratic city, right? But we often are pushing our elected officials to have these really tough, difficult conversations that we have to know. We know we can't take personal, right? Because we're talking about generations of systemic racism, racist policymaking, like you mentioned, the redlining and covenants, right? And so our budget is absolutely part of that. And I think when you look at past efforts, and even like Don mentioned before, even with the Tiger Tech scandal with LBPD, we forced these conversations and they were talking because the people were talking, right? And so us being able to support and mobilize community members to talk about these issues and force these conversations, forced action, right? And I think history tells us that this is what the history of social movements is, right? Because we're seeing people in the streets, because people are putting their lives literally on the line because of this in solidarity. But for like folks like me, non-Black folks, right, who are in solidarity and putting their lives on the line, but also for Black folks who understand the gravity of this issue, right, and are taking to the streets. This is what that conversation is about, right? And it's about people really being able to say that we want to see a solution, and that solution is defunding the police. That solution is all these different pieces that Audrena spelled out. So there's a lot of work to be done. And, you know, we as a campaign are wanting to hear from our elected officials, and we're going to be having a lot of these conversations. We can't just have them in the street, but we need to have them in the places where decisions are being made. And that is going to be the Budget Oversight Committee. That's going to be the City Council meeting. That'll be legislative visits. We're encouraging people to reach out directly to their City Council members as well. And, you know, I want to say, like, one of the biggest frustrations is the fact that since COVID-19, we've had city council meetings where we haven't had actual live public comment, and people have been forced to use e-comments that don't necessarily get read. We're now had our first council meeting where people can start giving live public comment, but we're limiting 20 speakers per item, right? Which is ridiculous.
So do you think, I mean, I don't know that you've already started having these conversations. I know budget season is coming up, but if you have started having the conversations with the elected officials, do you feel like your voice is being heard more this time around, considering what's happening both locally and nationally? Or if you haven't started having these conversations, are you expecting your voice to have more weight behind it this year? Anybody? I'm sorry, I'm not just talking to James.
Yeah. You know, I think I'll say this. There's obviously a lot more weight around holding local systems accountable, and that includes our political systems, our decision makers, around all the issues and oppressive behaviors that come out of our local systems and institutions, right? Like, we recognize that in this moment of this convening and, you know, at this height of Black liberation struggle, we know that during these heights, that when Black people benefit, like, everyone's going to benefit, right? We acknowledge and recognize that exists and that happens, right? We know that co-optation is a thing. We know that exploitation is a thing, right? I'm grateful that here in Long Beach, we have been working in relationship since the beginning of a lot of organizing efforts that have gone on in this city. I think that that's why we've been able to move together so well. In terms of, do we think that they're listening anymore now? It's hard to tell, right? Because we've been crying out around these inequities and disparities that exist specifically in Black communities, but in other communities of color too, right? And I think around Black needs, they haven't been listening, but they know what the needs are. Take, for example, we've been talking a lot about getting police out of our schools, so divesting from the school resource officers and LBPD, whatever numbers they are, out of our schools. We know that that doesn't work, right? Criminalizing our children or sending them through the school to prison pipeline doesn't work. But we know that when they're in relationship with socio-emotional counselors, academic counselors, have behavioral, supportive behavioral health therapists that are non-carceral, when children have, you know, culturally relevant arts and music, that those are preventative measures, and staff are in relationships with our children and understand what they're going through at home. So there's no need to create this, you know, 10 times more disciplinary actions against Black children. All of that can be reduced and prevented if we have culturally competent staff who are in place to tend to the needs of children who are being impacted by all the intersections of disparities and inequities at home, right? So that's one example. Yeah. Another example, when we're calling out, you know, we sent a letter in September to the full city council about transparency of police having to disclose records of violent officers who have murdered, who have committed physical assault, sexual assault, and you know, the police officers were in contract negotiations, and the mayor assisted the POA in sliding in an additional article at the end of negotiations that city council knew nothing about, according to them, when we brought it to their attention in September. So clearly they weren't listening, because we asked them, do not vote on something that you don't know about, that you didn't even know was inserted at the last minute. Many of them weren't even, you know, very familiar with Senate Bill 1421, this transparency law. And so we, you know, educated them, encouraged them not to vote to pass that, to wait, to go back for some conversation, to learn how that all came to be. And all of them chose to be bullied in that process, except for one council person who voted not to accept it as it was. And so there's, you know, when you look at, I'm gonna go back to the school piece for a moment, when you look at the needs of Black youth in our city, they haven't been listening. The statistics are there. They listen. They had a series of listening sessions when COVID hit, right? COVID didn't put a spotlight on the inequities and disparities. It put a spotlight on the inaction that the city has been taking for so long, that not only the city, but certain organizations, certain folks who have had access and resources to help close these equity gaps and who haven't. And now I think what the world is seeing and what Long Beach is seeing is a frustration and a demand saying, we are demanding an investment in closing those gaps in the Black community. To
Right.
Audrena's points around reparations, this is the time, if you want to call it that, right?
So let's bring Audrena back in. I don't mean to keep on going down the road, but we'll switch it up next time around. We have a few questions from the audience, but before we get into those, I want to ask, so you were speaking about LBUSD right now, and some of the other issues that have come up are maybe not necessarily controlled by the city council. So I guess my question is that, well, the focus has been on mostly what we've talked about is, city council. Are you guys also putting pressure on like county officials, Long Beach Unified School Board of Education officials? What is your plan of attack, I guess, in terms of putting pressure on elected officials at all levels in the city, whether it be community college board of trustees, LBUSD, county, because the funding revenues come in from different areas.
Pressure that's been put on them to call for the divestment from police and reinvestment and all of the other things that I just named.
Right.
When you have Black girls and boys who are only meeting 46 and 48% of A through G requirements, and at third grade level, they are only meeting 36 and 38% of reading and math, right? These are statistics that are also national. Again, Long Beach is just a microcosm of that. The pressure is on. And, I think Juan Benitez was a champion that night to present a calling for them to acknowledge the anti-Blackness that exists in our school system as well. And so there was, a huge a swell of, again, unprecedented pressure that was applied to the school board that night. So yes, the pressure is there too.
Okay.
Let me say this, that I think what we have to remember here is that we have issues. We have permanent issues, and that is our care, our love, our duty and responsibility to Black people. That is our issue, and that's where we approach everything. It doesn't matter your level of politics. I personally think, and I know a lot of other people in Black Lives Matter think, that it's not hard to figure out our position. It's public. It's all over the place. The issues keep showing up on social media and in the news. It's not hard to figure out what our issues are. And so what we're not very interested in is sequestered conversations with just a few people where we hem and haw about tinkering around the edges of reform. We are interested in revolution. And that means some stuff has to go. That means we have to reimagine what we do to really make real change. A lot of people have been in office for a very long time. A lot of policies have been in place for a very long time. And yet here we are. This, where we are, is not what we're interested in. And so folks who want to talk to us, we're fine having conversations, but we want you to be involved in conversation with the community. And that does not necessarily mean having some limited public conversation where you have to register and it's only open to 50 people, or it's only open, it's a small space that happens at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when working people are at work. Sure. That sort of thing. Yeah. So we will meet and talk with anybody, but even if we're not able to meet and talk with folks, it is not difficult to figure out the issues of Black people.
So you brought up the term revolutionary, and I think some people are struggling with the idea of defunding the police, or the conversation around abolishing the police in some cities. And one of our viewers' questions is, why is defunding the police a better option over police reform? And any one of you who wants to take that, take it.
If I may, I mean, not just here in Long Beach, but everywhere. I think the new number now is that 44% of Long Beach's budget goes to police. That's just the 44% that we can count transparently in the city budget. That's not talking about what we can't see. underneath all the little ways money gets funneled around and that sort of thing. Police are doing jobs that they are not qualified to do. They are not qualified to be mental health counselors. They're not qualified as behavioral counselors. They're not qualified to address the issues that show up time and time again with our houseless community. They're not qualified necessarily to address what's happening when we have intimate partner violence. That is not what they should be doing. We have people who go to school, spend thousands and thousands of dollars getting in debt to become behavioral scientists, to become psychologists, to become drug counselors, to do these kinds of jobs. We defund those things from the police and put them where they belong, and then re-educate our communities that this is who you call when these things are happening. How many times have we seen a Black person murdered by a police officer because that a family member called because their family member was having severe mental stress and showing out? One of our founders, Patrice Cullors, that is the story of her brother. He has mental health issues and he has a long, horrible history with LBPD. These are the things we mean when we say defund the police. Put the resources where they properly belong so that the police who are not trained to do those jobs don't come and do what they are trained to do, which is to behave as warriors against the people. Because if that was not true, then they wouldn't be shooting people. They wouldn't be laying on people's necks. They wouldn't be throwing people up against the walls and on the ground in the ways that they do. I'm sorry, I just get...
No, you're fine. You're fine. And you brought up, while he's not Black, I think the BLM movement here in Long Beach has adopted the case of Faraz Murad, who was killed while he was having a bad experience of recreational drugs. Now, in terms of, since we're on this topic, defunding, how much money are we talking about? Are we talking about $10 million? Are we talking the entire budget? I think that's what people are curious about. I mean, whoever wants to take that, and how much, so let's give it a number. I don't know if you guys have come up with one, and where does that get redistributed?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit here. We have, Audrena just mentioned like a community health council type space, right? When we look at our needs, when we reprioritize what our community needs are, whatever that equals up to, that's how much we need to transition resources from the police department, right? What Audrena just mentioned is the work that belongs to other professions in the community around education, employment, housing, social work, and mental health. Whatever the costs are to ensure that our community is trained up and supported in how they're handling de-escalation and how they're showing up to tend to arguments that happen in the street. I've broken up domestic violence situation right in front of my house, right? So we have folks in our neighborhood who do it all day long. We, to Audrena's point, if our communities understood that there's someplace else, a community health council, for example, who are a team of residents who are trained and willing and ready to respond to these nonviolent situations and all these other aspects of life, then whatever that costs, if that costs 5 million, then take 5 million, right? If that costs 10 million, then take 10 million. But let me get to these other points. I learned not that long ago that, we watch our police departments continuously trying to reinvent themselves. Crime is down, right? Crime is down across the country, here in Long Beach. And so this idea that suddenly, we want to be the first responders to mental health, or we should hold the contract at the airport or the port. The fact that they just, got that contract there when the workers who were there were doing a perfectly good job. I don't understand how that happened. I don't understand how they make an argument to want to build a brand new police academy, and for just the administration building alone, they want to spend $11.2 million on the administration of a police academy. When it comes to defunding, I'm going to read off these lists of items, okay? Hold on. So
if I can add my Don is
no, it's here. I just was going to pick which one I wanted to start with. So first, the CPCC. We know that police oversee that. Whatever the investment they're currently putting in there to oversee themselves, that needs to be transitioned to the community so that the community can lead a community-led civilian oversight body, right? The CPCC is a complaint commission. We need oversight that up to and including prosecution, and the resources to ensure that victims of police violence are helping leading that and are resourced around their legal rights and prosecution. We want to require the police, not our city, to be liable for the misconduct and violent settlements and end qualified immunity, right? We know that just in the payouts alone since 2014, it's over $30 million. Right? Reduce the power of the police unions. We don't want our candidates to continue to take POA money because then they're beholden to what they want and what they need versus to the people. Immediately fire police officers who have any excessive force complaints. There's no need to hire new officers or replace the fired ones, the retired ones, or resigned officers. Cut the funding for public relations. Our public relations are with the people who are filling those other positions that the police need not qualify themselves for. In their contracts with social services, care services, government agencies who are providing care, it's whatever those amounts are that they have integrated themselves in these other aspects of life, whatever those costs are, to cut that back, transition that work back to where it belongs, the professionals and agencies in the community, add that up, and there's your number.
That sounds like a lot of money. and you know, I will say that compliments of a colleague here at the Business Journal, the budget for the police department this past year was actually upgraded to 48% of the city budget, up from 44.
One thing I want to just add on to that really quickly, just going back to your original question, and we kind of talked about this early on in the pandemic when we did an interview, is that we often hear the line from decision makers every year. This new year is not an exception, that, well, we don't have enough money for that. There's not enough money for that, right? And so the reality is we've been putting all of these resources over time into the police department because, as Audrena said, our answer to homelessness, to health, and everything has been policing, right? And in reality, at the same time, right, we haven't been able to properly, we've had a affordable housing trust fund with no money in it. We've had a language access policy to implement for the past over 7 years with never fully funded, right? We have so many libraries that aren't open before noon, right? Aren't open on Mondays. We haven't had money for a lot of things. So the longer that we continue to be fixated on, well, what dollar amount are we talking about exactly, without going to Dawn's point about addressing the actual need, then we are just making excuses for a violent and racist system that continues to harm and kill Black lives in the city. So I just want to put that perspective out there, because I think that's, if we're fixating on what percentage and what number of all of this, then we're missing the point that we're talking about how do we reimagine something different and match those community priorities.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, people want to know, like, if are we talking about putting 10 million from police into, you know, health community health centers, like Audrena brought up, or I think people want to, I don't know that their opinion would change, but I think that they could better develop their opinion on whether or not they support a defunding of the police if they know, like, actually how much money you guys are proposing putting into these. And not to, I mean, it's obviously a values question of what, you know, do we put money in police, or do we put it into the health department, which is consistently, you know, losing money, and they depend on grants.
Jason, how about we get them to disclose their budget?
Right.
How about that?
How about this? How about we focus on the word reimagine? We don't start from where we are now. Where we are now has us where we are now. Throw out the budget. Let's do community-based budgeting. Let's talk to the community. What do you need? And then we call on the experts and we wrap the dollar amounts around that. It's unfair to ask the people who don't have the expertise to put the dollar amount on the thing.
Sure.
Ask the community what they need, and then let's hold our elected officials responsible for calling on the professionals to come talk to us and talk to them about the cost of these things, because we know what we need. So I just say, let's throw out what we have. Let's not tinker around with what we have. Let's turn it all, let's throw it all out. Let's revolutionize this thing. Let's make it something that's really, really what we need, not based on some budget practicing that we've been doing for the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years or whatever. This is a new day. This country is more diverse now than it's ever been before.
Right.
We had our documented brothers and sisters can breathe a little easier because of today.
You brought up I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I just, again, you give me.
No, you brought up a good point about asking the community what they need. And I think if for anybody that was out at the first large protest, I think 2 weeks ago, May 31st, if you were out there, it wasn't just Black people, it was people of all backgrounds that were out there chanting George Floyd's name, calling for police reform. So one of our questions that we got was, what as a white male living in Long Beach can I do to be involved and get changes? Anybody?
First, check your privilege. Check your privilege. That might mean educating yourself if you don't know what white privilege is. That might mean educating yourself on what white supremacy is. That might mean learning how to step back in places and at times when you as a white male normally would step forward. That means, I think, joining organizations that are focused on helping white folk with their anti-racism, become anti-racist. Organizations like Showing Up for Racial Justice or White People for Black Lives is what I would suggest. Is it going
to be helpful for this movement to have more white voices involved, though?
Absolutely. As an African-American person, I live in a community here that is 12% of the population of Long Beach, 13% of the population of the nation. The majority population in this country, though trending brown, is still white. The power structure in this country is still white, and more specifically white and male. So absolutely, we need those voices, but those voices have to constantly check themselves and check their privilege, because the white supremacist frame that we live in is seriously deep. And so they have to be in allyship, in co-conspiratorship with people of color all the time.
Yeah, I'll add that, in conversations that we've been having with our members, with our extended and broader community, inside Black community, just our community, the conversations that are being had around the level of distrust of local government, the distrust of the decision makers in the city, the distrust of organizations who have benefited on the oppression of marginalized communities and impacted communities. And when I say impacted, I mean everyone who's impacted by all of the statistics that we know that are in all of the equity reports, all the disparities that COVID highlighted again. In those communities, there is a disconnect, right? Even within Black community and outside Black community. And those who are building and doing the work, these are folks who run construction companies, who run electrical companies. These are mamas who are homeschooling that are pulling curriculum from the Children's Defense Fund, Freedom Summers and Freedom Schools that exist around the country and that's hosted here by Success and Challenges in Long Beach, right? These are mamas who are pulling curriculum from Black Lives Matter in schools that we actually piloted right at the end of last year, or I think it was maybe December, January, February, who are looking at how to form Saturday schools for our Black youth, teaching our young babies how to value their Black skin, their Black magic, their Black strengths, their Black gifts, right? How to ensure that we're centering an Afro-centered cultural education that we know our history did not teach us, right? To Audrena's point around white men, like our public school system has left our history out. Black people's history, African people's history, other than Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, a couple sentences on page 92 of the history book, right? Like,
some states have even changed it, like in Texas, where they tried to reframe slavery as
immigration.
Right.
All of that, right? And so that building is happening within community. And so, what I think a lot of non-Black people, while Black people are building, and again, the emphasis is on an acknowledgement and recognition that within Black community, there is a feeling of we are on our own and are having to build up our Tulsa, Oklahomas, our Black Wall Streets, our Rosewoods, where in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we owned our own transportation industry. our own banking industry, our own lending and housing industry, our own school systems, right? And then what happened? The US bombed on Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, right? We're constantly having to rebuild, and that's the state that we're in. And so when the request comes to the city for support around getting our men who are in job training and being mentored certified, right? We expect that if that's held at, let's say, Long Beach City College, then cut the bureaucracy, cut the red tape, ensure that our Black men and women have access to that certification. When these projects, all of this building that's going on here downtown are going up, when we talk about local hire, we're not saying in these project labor agreements, we're not saying local hire adjacent Orange County. We're saying local hire Black people in Council District 6 and 9 should be getting those jobs and the job preparation for the jobs, right?
And that's been an issue that we've James and various other groups have helped highlight over the past few years, where the different tiers of hiring have actually resulted in some Long Beach projects not having very many Long Beach workers constructing them. So you were talking about rebuilding, Tulsa, Oklahoma, but specifically we're talking about, reimagining and rebuilding Long Beach. So last week there was a little bit of a development at the head of the Budget Oversight Committee, where Councilwoman Stacey Mungo said that she's not necessarily stepping down from the board, but she's deciding to take a step back from being the chair of that very powerful commission that gets to, I don't want to say dictate, but they do get to set a tone for how the budget season kind of plays out. And they do get to take a deeper dive than some of maybe the other council members do. So right now she's advocating for Councilman Al Austin, who is a Black man, to become the chair. I was curious of how you guys view, I don't know that the mayor will eventually appoint him the chair, but if he is, or if another person of color takes her spot as the chair and maybe another person of color replaces her on the board, on the commission, how do you guys view that development? Is it helpful for what you guys are trying to accomplish?
I'm going to touch on it briefly and I'll pass it to Audrena. Whoever is going to help center Black people in all the aspects of life around housing, around Black women are the most rent burden in the city. We know that from the equity profile report, right? Black women, how do we reverse that? More Black women are dying during childbirth. My own cousin had a recent incident, and I keep bringing her up, and then I can't share completely, but it's, it's personal because we know too many women dying in childbirth. How are we reversing those numbers, right? Whoever is going to support and put leverage on all these white men, white women, brown folks, let me just sidestep. Thank you. Just quick thank you to all of our Filipinos for Black lives, our Indigenous people for Black lives, our Cambodians for Black lives, our Latinos for Black lives, and white people for Black lives, because this is who right now is helping drive this home. So whether education, the accountability around the police injustices, and ending the direct and indirect anti-Black systemic violence against Black people in all the ways, whether that's Al Austin, right? If we have someone like, Felton, who is on the school board, under his watch, our numbers for Black youth in our schools are the statistics show that our children overall are suffering. Not all our children. So many of our children are brilliant and succeeding beyond everyone else, far beyond. But as a whole, the numbers show the impact and lack of focus on changing those numbers. We encourage Felton to step in before he leaves to set something up, like the acknowledgement of like the city did, the acknowledgement of how white supremacy is anti-Black even in our school system. Mayor Garcia, I think, already acknowledged that. So whether it's a Felton or an Al or any other Black person or non-Black person, center Black lives in every aspect of life so that we can start shifting these statistics, bring folks who have been pushed out due to gentrification, bring them, to the extent where we can start bringing folks back and where Black people can thrive here in this city. The culture in this city has partially been built on Black success. The culture in the city of Long Beach has partially been built on Black success. We need to reinstate that success.
So so you're saying maybe, I mean, it could be a good development with Al, or you're open to anybody as long as they're willing to push the development of what
improving Black lives in every way.
Correct. Remember I said earlier, we have issues. And the other way that statement goes, we have issues, we have permanent issues, we do not have permanent friends. Okay? We have interests. And if you're someone who's down with addressing the issues that face Black people, if you're someone who's down with reimagining, if you're someone down who's not afraid of that word revolutionary, I used to be. I had to learn. I'm inviting everybody else to learn what that is, because you have to change the white supremacist frame that makes you think that change is not possible. Change is possible. And it doesn't matter to me the skin color or the gender of the person who's interested in helping to make that happen. The issue is, are you interested in helping to make that happen?
Okay.
And
go ahead, James.
I want to say about that really quickly is that, you know, I would encourage folks, if you aren't familiar with the Budget Oversight Committee, to research and learn about that. We have a really great one-pager in our campaign that we put together to understand that dynamic about how power is situated in the city, because to all these points, if we don't understand how power is centralized, who has power, and how these decisions are being made, then we're going to put a lot of energy and it's going to go nowhere, right? And even in the first People's Budget, we saw the Budget Oversight Committee of Al Austin, Stacey Mungo as chair, and Susie Price make cuts to all the things the mayor had proposed, all the things we were proposing, all cut in half. And because it went to the full city council with 9 members, they reversed all of that, right? So unless we have people, you know, unless we're aware about these dynamics and understanding power, then this is so critical for us to win our People's Budget.
Yeah.
Okay, and you know, we try to keep these things as close to, we've been talking for a while, and honestly, we could have a 30-minute conversation about everything that's in the People's Budget, whether it be housing, which we didn't even touch. I'm sorry to the reader who submitted that question, language access, which I know you've been fighting for years, not you personally, but you know, you guys as a coalition. But let's kind of get a closing statement, I guess, from you guys in terms of, I guess, optimism or how you see this. You know, the budget has to be approved before October 1st. They're simultaneously trying to fix the current budget with the hole that was blown in it through COVID, and also trying to write a new one for 2021, which is where the People's Budget for this year comes into play. So where do you hope that we are when this budget is passed? Probably on a very late night in September. You guys can, in whichever order, whoever wants to go.
I'm gonna kick it to James to start.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think one, you know, to all the folks who have been in this organizing fight for a long time and in this struggle, but also to the folks who are watching who are new to this and seeing systemic racism laid bare for the first, you know, maybe for the first time, or maybe really seeing it in a new light. This is what we're talking about, right? The budget fight is absolutely critical to this. And to that, I tell them, you know, you're going to hear a lot about, we don't have money for this is unreasonable, and try and throw everything out there about how we can't do it. And that's never stopped us before, and that shouldn't stop us, right? And so I think, you know, we've talked a lot about how, and as Don mentioned, like all of these different communities that are showing up for Black lives. And to me, that's what this work and being in deep relation and deep connection with each other is so important. And that's what this campaign and this People's Budget is about. It's about not only just transforming the numbers and our budgeting, but also transforming how we're relating to each other. I almost cussed, but I remember Jason's note about not to do that. But like how we're transforming being in a relationship to one another. And I think that's when, you know, when I hear about like a revolution, that's what I'm thinking about too. And so, you know, I want to encourage folks, just as the reader mentioned before, even if you're a white male or you're anyone else, right? Go to lbforward.org/peoples-budget. Download the People's Budget, contact the mayor, council member, all the council members and city managers from Modica. You can sign up. We're going to be doing a lot of teach-ins as well virtually. And we need your voices. We need you all to help share and spread this word and talk about how we reimagine something differently. So it fills me with a lot of optimism. I'm a cancer sign, so I cry a lot. Not, so, there's been a lot of moments in all of this campaign where it's something that's really, really transformational. And I hope that people, when they read the People's Budget too, that they see that we're talking about not just moving money away from policing, but imagining how all of our lives and our communities can be different.
And Don or Audrena, whichever you want to go first.
Yeah, I'll go. Come time when our city's budget is coming to a new formation, I'm going to hope that there is a genuine investment in a building up of a Black economy, a support and an investment in a building up in a Black economy. And that means flipping all the statistics where Black people are on the top of everything bad and the bottom of everything good. We need to reverse that. They know the statistics, right? Before this, let's listen to people. Well, you just listen to people around COVID, right? You've been listening to BLM, or you've been hearing, I don't know how deeply you've been listening, but you've been hearing BLM for the last 6 years. So we know what the statistics are in every aspect of life around housing, education, jobs, access to all the resources to improve these conditions. And I think a great part of that investment is going to come from the reimagining of getting the police, like cutting into this police state, right? Our military influences our globe, right? Like you're hearing things moving in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, right? Like that exists globally, nationally, and locally. And so the most that we can do here locally is to start to cut this investment in a police state in every way. That goes beyond the general budget, let me say, right? Because there are other resources that police use outside of the general budget to police our communities, to criminalize poverty, right? Mm-hmm. All of that needs to be cut into. And so I hope that in our budget that we're able to see a genuine divestment from a police state, a reimagined reinvestment into all the needs that our city has for all of our people, and specifically and intentionally a focus centering of the 12% of Black people who are left here. I'm really frustrated. What moves me a lot is so many of my friends who I went to school with at Los Cerritos, at Lafayette, at Jefferson, at Milliken, at Lakewood, I went to a couple of schools, right, have been pushed out, are saying they can't afford to live here anymore, that they are over rent burden. Gentrification has pushed so many of my friends and family out.
Right.
And in fact, now they're in Victorville, right, where young Black men are being hung. The fuck? I'm sorry. Oops, you said don't cuss.
You broke the rule.
Well, you know what? The fuck? Because our children are being hung all over this country right now.
Yes.
So I don't care about, sorry, for the kids listening, this is how serious it is. A cuss word, broken windows, broken glass. We have babies hanging from trees right now. Our city needs to invest, be an example. You want to be a leader in everything, be an example in ending the white supremacist foundation of all of our local systems and institutions, and invest in centering Black lives in all of our aspects of lives. That's it. I don't care what the cost, figure it out.
And lastly, Audrena.
I want to say that this is a transformative time that we live in. I feel like I've been saying that for the last 6 years, because things are happening in the world that are just, it's amazing. It's amazing. I live in a time, it doesn't always feel like this, but we're in a time of amazing grace. Because grace is shining on us because we're making change. There's positiveness that comes out of the horror. And there's plenty of horror. Every time I turn on the news, there's something awful to see, especially lately. But I want to remind those of us who are able to vote, who are in positions to make change right now, that the generation coming behind us has lived through multiple transformative movements already. They have lived through 9/11. They have lived through 3 simultaneous wars. They have lived through the first Black president of the United States. They have lived through Afrofuturism and the positivity that, and the creativeness that that brings, and the transformational thinking, the revolutionary thinking about being here and present and powerful in tomorrow. They have lived through narratives of Black people in movies like Django Unchained and The New Birth of a Nation that have reimagined Black folk, even in the time of chattel slavery, as heroines, heroes and heroines. These people coming up behind us are ready for something that we are not currently doing. They have lived through the murder of Trayvon Martin, and they watched what happened to his murder. They have lived through what happened to Sandra Bland, and they watched what happened. They have lived through what happened to Walter Scott and Alton Sterling and Ezell Ford here and Rashari O'Mac. They're living through that, and they're watching and knowing that the system is failing them. It's failing. And so when we talk about what do we do, again, we are not talking about tinkering reform on what based on what is. We are talking about throwing it out. We are in a transformational time.
Right.
Act like we are in a transformational time.
I think everybody kind of realizes that we are at a tipping point, I guess, for lack of a better word, but things are going to change one way or the other, I think. And it's probably, getting with the efforts of organizations like the ones that you guys are affiliated with. You guys are certainly putting pressure on city leaders across the country, and it may, facilitate change pretty quickly. At least I know that's what you guys are hoping for, real change in the next, I don't know, weeks, months. Definitely, I don't think you guys are waiting years anymore for change, at least in the conversations that I've had. But I do want to thank you in terms of hours. It has been an hour that we've been talking, and I'm really grateful for you guys doing this on such short notice. It was really good, having you guys talk. That way I didn't have to talk so much. You guys really carried the conversation. As far as tomorrow, I think we're trying to find somebody to come on and talk about DACA. So if you are watching out there and you're, an immigration specialist, or if any of you guys know someone, go ahead and feel free to email us or text us, leads, because it's a really important decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court today. And I'm sure a lot of people want to hear about, what this means going forward for the tens of thousands of dreamers that live locally here. So again, thank you, James, Don, and Audrena for joining us for today's extended live chat, and everybody for watching.
Is it possible? I realize we're at 2. Is it possible to invite folks watching, those who we do this work for? Would that be okay?
Are we live still? Let me check.
Or not?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, how quick? Okay, yeah, okay. Go ahead.
I just want to name I wanted to open us up with this, and I let it go without doing so. For those who have unfortunately become victims of police violence, we know the names nationally. You mentioned them, and I just want to mention them here and just invite folks to take a moment of silence as we're leaving out on this interview right now. I'm just going to say their names. Feel free to repeat them, but they are Dante Jordan, Noel Aguilar, Hector Mordejon, Jason Conoscenti, Faraz Murad. Thank you to those firefighters who were trying to help for us. Those 3 firefighters who were helping him before the officer Hernandez showed up and murdered him. Martin Hurtado, Lionel Gibson, Barry Prack, Simwan Priem, Frederick Taft, murdered by a white supremacist, and LBPD did not help to investigate, or Stacey Mungo in her district. Catherine Gomez, Luis Ramirez, Jordan Michael Griffin, Cezanne Mount, and just a moment of silence for them. Thank you for all of your work for them. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, thank you guys again. And we'll certainly probably have you guys back on. So I appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for watching. And hopefully tomorrow, tune in for what we're hoping to get a conversation on DACA. So thank you, and have a good Thursday, everyone.